Welcome to America with an Accent that today takes us to Turkey as part of our occasional series America and Friends. Not long ago, Hagia Sophia, a World Heritage Church, was converted into a mosque, triggering a worldwide conversation on the effect of this move by Turkish government. What does it signal to the world? Today our guest is Dr. Kılınç, the author of the book Alien Citizens, the State and Religious Minorities in Turkey and France.
I was born and raised in Turkey. I got my BA and MA degrees in Turkey, in Ankara, and came to Arizona for my PhD in 2003. And ever since then, I've been here in the United States for almost 2 decades now.
Dr. Ramazan Kılınç is an associate professor of political science and director of the Islamic Studies program at University of Nebraska at Omaha. His research focus is religion and politics, and his recent publication, Alien Citizens, looks at the state and religious minorities in Turkey and France.
What triggered the writing of this book? Where did the idea come from?
Okay, thank you so much. As I mentioned, I started my PhD in 2003 at Arizona State University, just 2 years after 9/11. So there was a rising debate about Muslims in Western countries at the time. And especially there was a rising Islamophobia in the West, particularly in Europe. And I just wondered the concrete policy implications of that trend for minorities living in European countries. So after doing my research, I found that France had the harshest and the most discriminatory policies toward Muslims in Europe. And the reason was because the far right in France was able to use Islamophobia, to utilize Islamophobia in pushing for their policy agendas. When this was happening in France, at the same time, Turkey was having a very different experience at that time. So there was a relatively more reformist laws that were passing through the Turkish parliament toward religious minorities. And then the reason was, again, an international factor, Turkey's candidacy status to European Union. So there was a pressure for Turkey to implement some reforms, which also included reforms about minorities. So then it triggered the idea of why not to compare these two cases, which is rarely compared. Turkey and France has been compared in terms of secularism, but not in terms of religious minorities.
And what is your approach that you propose in your book to those case studies?
Okay, very good. I think my presentation of the topic somehow introduced my approach, but it is in the book I analyze the role of international context in the study of religious state policies toward religious minorities. Simply, I argue that the policy change toward religious minorities becomes possible when strong domestic actors find a suitable international context that can help them execute their policies. If I contextualize this to Turkey and France, in the Turkish case, the Turkish Islamists used the European Union pressure to transform Turkish politics that brought a reformist moment toward Christians, but also it allowed them to survive in Turkish politics because those policies liberalized Turkish domestic politics in many areas, including the role of military in politics, which was a big challenge for Turkey's Islamists in 2000s. And in the French case, the far right utilized the rise of Islamophobia in Europe for their agenda of more restrictive policies toward Muslim minorities. So the presence of an international context shifts the domestic balance of power and makes some policies more possible.
I would like you to help me understand, based on Turkey and France's cases, how would you characterize the role of international community? In your book, you talk widely about this topic. In our conversation right now, you touched a little bit about that. And you say that in France, there is discrimination, and it is proven towards religious minorities. And the international community did put some pressure, but not as much as in the case of Turkey. And if we compared the size of religious minorities in both countries, we're talking about a big difference. In France, we're talking about 8 to 10% of the population, while in Turkey, we're talking about 1% of the population. Why was it the international community's pressure different on those two countries?
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you so much. Yeah, as you mentioned in the book, I showed that there was not much international pressure toward France to change the course of policies that it took in 2000s. There were some criticisms, to be honest, like some non-governmental organizations like Human Rights Watch or Helsinki Federation, which existed at the time, or the United States as an international actor in French context, criticized the direction that the French state took toward Muslim minorities, but it was not at a level to make an impact on the policies.
Exactly. We had the banning of religious symbols in France, although there was pressure from international community. Am I correct?
That's correct, yeah. In the European Union case, when you are a member, you see a very big discrepancy in terms of how Europe approaches religious politics. State-religion relations is really left to the states in many cases. But in the Turkish case, we have seen a big pressure because Turkey was a candidate country, not a member country. So it is easier to put pressure on candidate countries because there are stakes. To become a member is a big stake for the countries, especially in Turkey, since the government was supportive of the move. As I mentioned, it will help the government survive in Turkish domestic politics. So they were welcoming to an international pressure because that international pressure was not only changing state policies toward religious minorities, but it was transforming the whole political system. The military, for example, the role of military was minimized with this same international pressure, which the governing AKP, Adjust and Development Party, really welcomed because it opened space for them. So two things, I think. First, when a country is a candidate country in the European Union, it's easier to put pressure. And Turkey was in such a condition at that time. Second, I think also the domestic actors will somehow be welcoming to such a pressure. We need a resonance between the pressure and domestic appeal of that. So in France, we didn't have both. Unique conditions that Turkey were in those years really explains why we had such a pressure in the Turkish context, but not in France.
The international community, has it lost its credibility in the eyes of Turkey or other wishful members of European Union?
I think in terms of just the European Union pressure at the time, it is, I don't think so in a way. I mean, of course, people were critical of European Union's very right approach to religious minorities. But I think the policymakers in Turkey at that time were more concerned about making those reforms really happen in Turkey because they had a bigger agenda of surviving in Turkish politics. It served to their own political interests, not because they were very liberal and they were very committed to those reforms, but it really helped them.
We'll get back later on in our discussion in the domestic leadership to analyze Turkey's case a little bit more, but I wanted your opinion on two recent developments in Turkey and with the second one between Turkey and Greece. First of all, we have the church that Hagia Sophia that is a UNESCO site that was converted into a mosque, and soon after that, in 3 weeks or so, we have the dispute between Turkey and Greece regarding drilling in the Eastern Mediterranean, the incident of these days. Can we use your approach to explain those two situations? What would be the explanation based on your approach?
Yeah, okay, I can try. Probably my approach is more helpful to explain Hagia Sophia than the geostrategic competition in Eastern Mediterranean, but it can still shed some light on that. I think the political environment that made reforms toward Christian minority in Turkey in 2000s is gone now. At that time, Turkey was having serious negotiations with the European Union to become a member. And Justice and Development Party, which is led by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, needed domestic and international support to remain in power. And so Erdogan implemented the EU reforms, which included improvement of the status of Christians as well. And he did so because he wanted to gain ground in domestic politics, and the EU helped him fight against military and authoritarian elements in Turkish politics. But when we look at the situation today, this context is all gone. Yeah, Turkey's membership to the EU is not much on the table. Nobody is enthusiastic about it, neither Turkey nor Europe. And officially the process is still pending, but
yes,
not about it anymore. Instead, Turkey is trying to establish a regional hegemony in the Middle East. Erdogan is too powerful that he can even imprison anybody in the country if he wants to. So that's really a different context. And there is no significant impediment to his power right now, which was the case in 2000s. So his autocracy has been based on popular support only. And popular support is still important, I think, for Erdogan to keep. That's the legitimizing factor for him. And for this reason, some people even call Turkey popular authoritarianism. An authoritarianism which lacks pluralism, but at the same time, Erdogan still entertains a huge support from the country. So in these days, since his popularity was under threat because of economic situations in Turkey, I think he sought to use Hagia Sophia, reconversion of Hagia Sophia, to keep his popularity, especially among his conservative base. And in terms of Eastern Mediterranean, maybe the lack of international balancing against Turkey these days, I mean, of course, that can create it, but Turkey wanting to have a little bit more regional assertiveness these days might have led such a crisis, even though the connections with my book is not as clear as it is with the Hagia Sophia situation.
In the case of Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey actually is just asking to be part of the dialogue, right, of the table, to be considered as a party in the discussion of how to use the resources in that area. Am I correct? In this case?
There is a disagreement between Turkey and Greece on which country has sovereignty on what areas, because the problem stems from the fact that Greek islands are very close to Turkey.
Okay, only 2 kilometers,
closer to
right?
Turkey than they are to Greece. So the problem is, where should we take the mainland as the standard in deciding where sovereign rights starts and ends or not? So that's a very technical international law issue. But yeah, Turkey does not want the islands to be considered as the main standard in calculating where sovereignty starts and ends, but it looks for mainland because Greek islands are just next to Turkey.
And the disputes between Turkey and Greece is nothing new to history. It's just that it looks like recently it's more on the revenge side. I was reading about the whole incidents and the recent development and relating to the history that you had so well described in your book. We have the Christians in Turkey that almost gaining all their rights, the religious minorities. And then I read about a mosque that the Muslim community in Athens has finally gained the right to build, but without a minaret. And then we have the Hagia Sophia converted into a mosque. And then we have the Eastern Mediterranean. And as you said, if you put all those things together, you do realize that the international context has changed. If we follow President Erdogan, for example, he started, as you said, as a prime minister that supported the reforms at first. And then we have this president right now, President Erdogan, that is almost defying international community, members of international community. And going along the lines that you mentioned, that there is a belief, a scientific opinion that Turkey is going towards authoritarian regime. My question when I try to connect all those dots is, did the international community's behavior dictate this move of Turkey towards authoritarian regime? What is the role of international community?
As the order of alien citizens, which is based on the premise that interaction of domestic and international factors produces the political outcomes, I cannot, of course, isolate the role of international community in the domestic developments in Turkey. So for sure, the reluctance of the EU to admit Turkey alienated Turkish reformists and made Turkey's reformists lose a strong ally for democracy. That's for sure. Also, the Arab uprisings led Erdogan to polish his Islamist credentials and leave the reformist discourse weaker in Turkey. And in the beginning of the uprisings, there was an expectation among the Turkish policymakers that the Muslim Brotherhood in places such as Egypt, Syria, Tunisia would take over government. So this expectation provoked Erdogan, who in the end was an Islamist, to become a regional leader in the Middle East. So he polished his rhetoric from more democratic to a more Islamist, and it led to authoritarianism. However, putting all the blame for international context in the Turkish case is not just, because with the changing circumstances, we also saw that Erdogan never internalized democracy. I mean, for some developments, of course, we can make a connection with international context, but he relegated democracy only to the ballot boxes. So perhaps even that conceptualization, the importance of ballot box, gaining the majority in the country, even that can be lost when he starts losing in the ballot boxes as well. We will see that. Especially after the coup attempt in July 2016, the government became one of the harshest authoritarian regimes in the country, in the world. It dismissed more than 150 government employees, imprisoned more than 50,000 people, which includes housewives, blaming to help for the coup. That's really difficult to understand. Thousands of academics lost their jobs. Most of them felt lucky if they were not in prison. Losing jobs was just regular. Hundreds of journalists were in prison. So also the former leader of Turkey's Kurdish party, People's Democracy Party, is in prison right now. So I think as far right in France, as I mentioned in the book, used Islamophobia to execute their discriminatory policy, which already exists in them, I think Erdogan also exploited international and domestic political conditions to eliminate his opponents and to stick on power. So Turkish authoritarianism is very authentic. It's national. It is made in Turkey by Erdogan.
I would like to know your opinion about what to expect based on what you said to happen in the Middle East, and especially the recent day we had the agreement between Israel and United Emirates. That triggered a reaction from Turkey and other Middle Eastern countries as well. So what's your prediction? What can we expect internationally?
In terms of in regional politics, I think Erdogan's authoritarianism was mostly based on exploiting or just playing with mostly religious and nationalist rhetoric, and his domestic, his international policies, especially regional policies in the region, in the Middle East, somehow helps him in that rhetoric. So Turkey, along with somehow Qatar and some Muslim Brotherhood elements in the region, is trying to lead a more Islamist or a bloc. I don't want to say Islamist, a bloc to somehow balance the US, UAE, Egypt, Israel alliance.
And that brings me to an observation, which is my last question as well. Not that I'm an expert, but it does look to me, and I may be wrong, it does look to me that we are in a situation that if you don't show your teeth, your case not going to be heard or not going to be considered, contrary to funding pillars of international organization. And is globalization working?
Okay. That's a very big question that we have been discussing probably since it started. But yeah, many scholars of international relations will probably agree on your observation. Power really matters in international politics, and it matters probably more than anything else in general. So many scholars consider international organizations as proxies of big powers, great powers, in reaching their own geostrategic goals. So you're right on a way, but I am also a little bit hopeful. I've been very pessimistic from the beginning, but I'm also a little bit hopeful. I think as compared to the past, international community achieved a a lot in balancing the power of the strongest. Yes, international organizations reflect global configuration of power, but at the same time, they sometimes open space for the people whose voices are less heard. So of course, I'm not one of the people who naively believe that globalization and an international community will provide solutions to many issues that we face. They are not. I am well aware that those reflect power structures in the world. But also, I think having a world without such organizations, especially like United Nations General Assembly, for example, Security Council is more biased toward great powers, but we hear the voice of the wake in General Assembly, for example, from time to time. So having a world with those organizations is probably better than their absence still. Of course, we need reform. Of course, we need probably more bottom-up organizations as well, not only international, intergovernmental organizations, but maybe transnational organizations in which people form from bottom-up and they become influential. We have such great civil society organizations. Maybe we can empower them. But I still believe that globalization creates forces to balance great powers, and I'm relatively more hopeful in that regard.
This was America and Friends for this week. I hope to see you again here next week on KPAO TV or online at www.newamericansmedia.com. Thank you for watching. I am Enkela Webio.